Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Jackson Jacksthorne had always been a lone wolf, a soldier of fortune who preferred to keep his distance from the chaos of politics and interstellar war. He made a living as a mercenary, taking jobs that kept him on the fringes of galactic society, but his latest assignment had drawn him into the heart of the conflict. He found himself on Valanaar Station, a massive spaceport on the edge of Caluxian territory. The Caluxians, a warrior race known for their brutal tactics and cold efficiency, had been at war with humanity for decades. Peace talks had stalled, and rumors whispered through the dark alleys of the station that a full-scale invasion was imminent. Jax had been hired by a mysterious employer to gather intelligence, a task he knew was more dangerous than anything he'd ever faced. The air in the bustling market district of the station was heavy with the smell of alien spices and the metallic tang of industrial fumes. Jax moved through the crowds, blending in with the flow of alien traders and travelers. His sharp eyes scanned the faces around him, alert for anything out of place. He wore a hooded cloak that concealed his face, a precaution against the prying eyes of the Caluxian patrols that monitored every inch of the station. As he turned a corner, he felt a chill run down his spine. The crowd parted, and a group of Caluxian soldiers marched through, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights. They moved with military precision, their gazes cold and calculating. Leading them was Commander Sarala Vex, a name whispered with fear and awe across the galaxy. Sarala was a legend among her people, a warrior whose ruthlessness was matched only by her beauty. Her skin was a deep metallic blue, and her eyes burned with a fierce intensity. Her long silver hair flowed like liquid steel down her back, and her body, sculpted by years of battle, moved with the grace of a predator. She was the embodiment of power, and her very presence commanded respect. But there was something about her that caught Jax's attention, a flicker of vulnerability, a moment where her eyes softened as she scanned the market. Jax's curiosity was piqued, but he knew better than to stare. He kept his head down, moving through the crowd as Sarala and her soldiers passed. But as he glanced back, he saw her eyes lock onto him. A chill ran through him. Did she recognize him? Impossible, he thought, as they'd never met. Still, her gaze lingered, and for a moment, he felt as though she was seeing right through his disguise. Jax's pulse quickened. He needed to disappear before her soldiers noticed him. He ducked into a side alley, disappearing into the shadows. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The mission was getting more complicated, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Back in his rented quarters, Jax reviewed the intel he had gathered, a series of coded messages intercepted between high-ranking Caluxian officials. The messages hinted at a secret weapon being developed, one that could tip the balance of power in the Caluxians' favor. His mission was to find out where it was, and if possible, disable it. But now, with Sarala Vex on the station, everything felt more dangerous. As he stared at the datapad, a message alert flashed across the screen. Meet me in the shadow market at midnight.
Come alone.
Jax's eyes narrowed. The message was from his contact, someone who claimed to have crucial information about the Caluxian plans. It was a risk, but he had no choice. If he was going to complete this mission, he needed every piece of intel he could get. At midnight, the shadow market was a maze of neon lights and dark corners, a place where deals were made in the shadows and information was traded for credits. Jax moved through the narrow alleyways, his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma blade, ready for anything. His eyes scanned every face, every shadow. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. As he reached the rendezvous point, he spotted a figure cloaked in darkness. The figure stepped forward, and Jax's heart skipped a beat. It was Sarala. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, hand tightening on his blade. Sarala's eyes met his, a mix of curiosity and something else, something deeper. "I should ask you the same, human," she replied, her voice cold but tinged with intrigue. "But I believe we may have more in common than you think." Jax's mind raced. Was this a trap? His instincts told him to run, but there was something in her gaze that held him in place. "I'm not interested in whatever game you're playing," he said, taking a step back. Sarala smirked, a hint of amusement crossing her face. "This is no game, human. You and I are after the same thing. The weapon you seek, it's more than just a military tool. It's a weapon that could wipe out entire planets. But what you don't know is that it's not fully operational. And I am here to make sure it never becomes so." Jax's eyes widened. Why would a Caluxian commander want to sabotage her own people? Sarala's expression hardened. Because not all Coluxians want this war. Some of us believe that peace with your kind is possible, but there are those who would destroy entire worlds to prevent that. She paused, her gaze softening as she took a step closer. You and I, we're not so different. We both want to survive. Jax felt a pull, a strange connection forming between them. He didn't know if he could trust her, but the way she looked at him, with those intense eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire, made it hard to turn away. You need my help, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she leaned closer. And I need yours. We can do this together, but you have to trust me. Jax's heart pounded as he stared into her eyes, feeling the electric tension between them. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, one that could get him killed. But there was something about Sarala, something that drew him in, a forbidden desire that he couldn't ignore. I'll help you, he said, his voice low. But if you betray me, I'll make sure you regret it. Sarala's lips curled into a smile. We'll see, human. We'll see. And as they stood there, their fates intertwined, Jax knew his life was about to change forever. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a dangerous alliance, but the fire in Sarala's eyes was something he couldn't ignore. She was unlike any Coluxian he'd encountered before. Her passion, her defiance against her own people, made him want to trust her, despite the risks. And then there was that electric connection between them, a pull that defied logic. Still, he knew he had to keep his guard up. One wrong move, and it could cost him his life. The shadow market was alive with activity as alien traders and travelers bartered under neon lights. Jax and Sarala moved through the maze-like alleys, careful not to draw attention. She guided him to a secluded corner, a small booth shrouded in darkness. Once they were inside, Sarala activated a signal jammer, ensuring no one could listen in. Jax leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. If we're doing this, I need to know everything. No more half-truths. Sarala's eyes flickered as she nodded, the glow of the neon lights casting shadows across her sharp features. Fair enough, human. The weapon is called the Abyss Cannon. It's a prototype designed to harness the energy of a dying star, enough power to obliterate planets. Jax's face tightened. And why are you telling me this? You're a Coluxian commander. If your superiors found out, I'd be executed for treason, she finished, her expression unreadable. But there are things you don't understand about my people, Jax. Not all of us believe in this war. Some of us, those who value more than just conquest, want a different future. Jax's eyes narrowed. And where do you fit in all this? She took a deep breath, her silver eyes softening for a moment. I was once loyal, like any Coluxian soldier. But I've seen what this weapon will do, what it's already done. I lost people I cared about when they tested it on one of our own colonies, a planet they deemed expendable. Her voice wavered, and for the first time, Jax saw a glimpse of vulnerability behind the fierce facade. Now I want to stop it. Jax studied her, the intensity in her eyes, the weight behind her words. And what's your plan? Sarala leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. There's a transport leaving the station tomorrow, bound for the Coluxian shipyards where the Abyss Cannon is being assembled. I have a way onto that transport, but I need a partner. Someone who can get past the human security checkpoints without raising suspicion. Jax felt a surge of adrenaline as her proposal sank in. You want me to pose as your prisoner? A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. It's the only way. You'll be captured by me, and we'll use that as our cover to board the transport. Once we're on the ship, we'll find a way to sabotage the weapon. Jax's gaze locked with hers, the tension between them building. The idea was risky, more so than anything he'd ever attempted, but there was a thrill in it too. Allricht, Commander. But if this goes sideways, you'd better be ready to fight your own people. She smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. The next day, Jax found himself bound in metal cuffs, his wrists shackled as Sarala led him through the crowded hangar of our station. She played her role perfectly, maintaining a cold, indifferent expression as her soldiers flanked them. Jax struggled to keep his heart steady as they approached the transport's checkpoint. Every step was a gamble, each guard they passed another potential obstacle. But Sarala's plan was flawless. Her rank and authority allowed her to move unchallenged. When one of the human guards, a tall man with a hardened expression, stepped forward, Jax felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This human prisoner, What's he charged with? The guard asked, eyeing Jax suspiciously. Espionage, Sarala replied, her voice icy. He was caught intercepting secure communications. High Command has ordered his immediate transfer to the Caluxian shipyards for further interrogation. The guard's eyes shifted between them, his hand lingering near his weapon. Jax held his breath, muscles tensing as he prepared for a fight. But Cyrilla remained calm, her gaze unyielding. After a tense moment, the guard nodded and waved them through. As they boarded the transport, Jax felt a surge of relief, mingled with excitement. They had made it past the first hurdle, but he knew the real danger was yet to come. The transport's interior was dimly lit, the air filled with the low hum of its engines. Sarala guided Jax to a holding cell in the rear compartment, securing him inside as part of their ruse. Once they were alone, she deactivated the cell security field and stepped close, her eyes locking onto his. You played your part well, human. Jax smirked, his voice low. And you make a convincing captor, Commander. A moment of silence passed between them, the tension palpable. Jax could feel the heat of her body as she stood inches away, the intensity in her eyes matching his own. Despite the danger they were in, there was an undeniable attraction building between them, an electric pull that made his pulse quicken. Sarala's lips curved into a sly smile. If we're going to make this work, you need to trust me, Jax. He felt his defenses slip, just for a moment. I'm not used to trusting anyone. But for now, I'll trust you. She nodded, her gaze lingering on his, and for a brief moment, the icy mask she wore seemed to melt. Her hand brushed against his, a brief touch that sent a shiver through him. Good. Because from this point on, we're in enemy territory. The transport shuddered as it left the station, the stars streaking past the viewport as they entered hyperspace. Jax knew there was no turning back now. They were heading straight into the lion's den, and the only way they'd make it out alive was by relying on each other. As Sarala stood before him, her eyes dark and filled with an intensity that sent a thrill through him, Jax felt a surge of excitement. It wasn't just the mission or the danger, it was her. The way she challenged him, the way she made his heart race. He knew this was more than just a partnership of convenience. For better or worse, he was in this with her. And deep down, a part of him didn't want it any other way. Hours later, the transport docked at the Caluxian shipyards, a massive construction facility that hovered above a gas giant, its massive arms assembling the weapon piece by piece. Jax watched from his cell as Sarala exchanged words with a superior officer, her body language tense yet controlled. His pulse quickened. The next phase of the plan was about to begin. Sarala returned, her eyes locking onto his as she entered the cell. We're in. But they've increased security around the cannon. We'll need to get creative. Jax grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. As they prepared for their next move, Jax couldn't ignore the electricity in the air between them. The mission was dangerous, but the thrill of it, combined with the tension simmering between him and Sarala, made it impossible to resist. Together, they were about to face a battle that could determine the fate of two worlds. And as he looked into her eyes, Jax knew he was ready for whatever came next. Jax's heart pounded as the transport's hatch hissed open, revealing the vast interior of the Caluxian shipyard. The hum of machinery echoed through the colossal hangar, and massive constructs of metal and steel loomed like sleeping giants, pieces of the Abyss cannon being assembled. The atmosphere felt heavy, the tension palpable as Jax and Sarala moved under the guise of prisoner and captor. Sarala's grip tightened on his arm, and she whispered through clenched teeth, "Stay close. We have to get to the control center if we're going to disable the weapon." Jax nodded, keeping his expression neutral as they passed clusters of Caluxian soldiers. They moved deeper into the shipyard, passing massive bulkheads and energy conduits. The smell of industrial fuel filled the air as warning lights blinked overhead. When they reached a heavily guarded access point, Sarala activated a holographic pad, displaying her identification as a high-ranking officer. The guards, stiff and obedient, let them pass, oblivious to the true nature of their mission. Inside the control center, the room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of screens displaying the weapon status and construction progress. Sarala moved with practiced efficiency, accessing the terminal. Her fingers danced across the interface as she bypassed the security protocols. Jax stayed vigilant, watching for any sign of trouble. His eyes flicked between the monitors and the entryway, his instinct screaming that something was wrong. Sarala, how much longer? She didn't look up, her voice calm but strained. A few more seconds. I'm uploading a virus into the system. It should overload the core and destabilize the cannon. The seconds dragged on, feeling like an eternity. Jax's fingers twitched near his plasma blade, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The countdown on the screen flashed, and Sarala's eyes narrowed as she typed in the final command. Done, she whispered. The cannon's core will overload in 5 minutes. We need to move. Just as they turned to leave, the door hissed open. Jax's hand flew to his blade, but it was too late. Caluxian soldiers poured into the room, weapons raised, and behind them stood a tall, imposing figure, High Commander Threx, Sarala's superior. Sarala Vex, Threx's voice boomed, echoing in the small chamber. I should have known you were a traitor. Jax's eyes darted to Sarala, whose face remained a mask of calm defiance. High Commander, she said coldly, I stand for peace, not annihilation. The Abyss Cannon is an abomination. Threx's eyes burned with fury. Peace is weakness. The Caluxian Empire will not be stopped by your pathetic ideals. He turned his gaze to Jax, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. And you, human, you will die alongside her. Jax's grip tightened on his blade. Not today. In a blur of motion, Jax charged, his plasma blade igniting in a flash of blue light. The first Caluxian soldier lunged, but Jax ducked under the strike, slashing upward in a swift motion. Sarala moved beside him, her own blade whirling as she struck with the precision of a seasoned warrior. The room erupted into chaos as the two fought back-to-back, fending off the soldiers. Jax's movements were fluid, each strike precise as he parried blows and countered with lethal efficiency. Sarala moved like a predator, her body a blur of motion as she struck down soldier after soldier. But they were outnumbered, and Threx's forces were relentless. Jax felt a burning pain as a blade grazed his arm, but he fought through the searing sensation. Sarala, we need to get out of here now. She nodded, taking down another soldier before pressing a button on her wrist communicator. The virus is set. We've got 3 minutes before this whole place blows. Follow me. They sprinted through the corridors, dodging blasts and ducking under obstacles. The station's alarm blared, warning of imminent destruction. The two of them moved as one, their instincts and skills perfectly in sync. As they reached the hangar, Jax saw their way out, a small fighter craft docked on the platform. But Threx wasn't far behind. He and a squad of elite soldiers closed in, weapons drawn. Sarala stopped, her eyes locking with Jax's. Get to the ship. I'll cover you. What? No, we're leaving together. Jax shouted, the desperation in his voice clear. Jax, there's no time, Sarala insisted, her eyes burning with determination. I need to hold them off so you can escape. You have to live, this fight isn't over yet. Jax's heart clenched, the thought of leaving her unbearable. But he knew she was right. I won't forget this, Sarala. I swear. She gave him a small, sad smile. I know. And then she turned, her blade ready as she faced the incoming soldiers. Jax sprinted toward the fighter, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the clash of battle behind him, Sarala's fierce war cries echoing through the hangar. As he reached the cockpit, he saw her, a figure of grace and strength, holding her ground against overwhelming odds. With a roar, the engines roared to life. The ship lifted off, and Jax punched the thrusters. The fighter shot through the hangar doors just as the station began to tremble, explosions rippling through its structure. He watched from the viewport as the Caluxian shipyard crumbled, flames and debris consuming everything. And then, in a final burst of light, the Abyss cannon detonated, taking the entire facility with it. The shockwave rocked Jax's fighter, and he gripped the controls, steadying the craft as he flew clear. As the station disappeared behind him, Jax felt a hollow ache settle in his chest. Sarala was gone. She had given everything to stop the weapon and save both their worlds. And though he had escaped, he knew he couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. Weeks later, Jax sat alone in a dimly lit bar on an outpost far from Caluxian space. He stared into his drink, the bitter taste doing nothing to numb the pain. The galaxy was safe for now, but it felt like a hollow victory. He thought of Sarala, her fierce eyes and the connection they had shared. She had been more than an ally, more than just a Caluxian commander. She was the one person who had truly understood him, and he had lost her. As he raised his glass, A familiar voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. To peace, human. Jax looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. Sarala stood before him, her face softened by a genuine smile. Surprised? She asked, her eyes glinting with mischief. He was out of his seat in an instant, pulling her into his arms. I thought you were gone, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Almost, she replied, her hand brushing against his cheek. But I wasn't going to let you face this universe alone. Jax grinned, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. Guess we've got some unfinished business, Commander.
Sarala smirked.
And a galaxy to protect. As they stood there, a new fire burned between them, one that promised adventure, danger, and a love that could withstand any battle. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, hand in hand. Because in the end, they were more than just allies. They were each other's reason to fight. The end.